Hey guys, we're going to start class in just a couple of minutes here. All right, I'm just getting attendance real quick here while I'm waiting for everybody to kind of join. So once we hit 2 o'clock, we'll get started. All right, looking like you got a pretty good number of people. It's just about 2 o'clock. So actually, I think what we'll do is we'll get started. We left off in both classes at Pocahontas. And so actually we had two people who were in the middle of their slide presentations on Pocahontas. That was Lauren and Mary. Um, and both of you are with us today. So, Lauren, do you want to add some? Because we had to kind of rush through the end
This
of
is
it.
the class we debated. We're not going to do that now, but
Yeah. So we don't have to rush through it, but I think we left off where Pocahontas had gotten married. She had rejected her own culture to a certain extent, had taken a Christian name, Rebecca, had gotten married, and with John Rolfe, and had a son. And I kind of was quickly going through the rest of the story, but the period was ending. So can we pick up there? And you can kind of add what you have, and then I'm going to jump over to Mary, and then she can add what she has as well.
Yeah, sure. I'm pulling up my stuff now.
Okay. Well, do you want me to have Mary go first then?
Sure, if she'd like to.
All right, Mary, would you like to go first? Mary? I saw your name on the list there.
Here, I can go.
Okay.
I've got it pulled up. You said you left off that when she got married and had her son?
Yeah, she got married. So she had been abandoned by her dad, and now basically, she's this captive. They don't follow through on their promise to kill her, if he didn't give the soldiers. And so, at that point, she's at kind of a low point. She's been betrayed by her dad, and this guy named John Rolfe comes and makes advances towards her. So go ahead and pick up from there.
Yeah, I can do that. Do you want to know about John Rolfe or just their married life?
Absolutely. Go ahead. Share what you have.
Cool. Well, due to her imprisonment, Pocahontas met the widower and the tobacco planter, John Rolfe. The two decided to marry, likely for both love and political purposes, just to show that the white man can marry and can make a native, well, white, I don't know how to put that, but anyways. They sent word to Chief Powhatan that they wanted to marry. He consented, as did the Virginian governor, Sir Thomas Dale. It's unclear what happened to Pocahontas' first husband, but divorce was allowed in Powhatan culture, so Pocahontas married Rolfe in April of 1614. The match was considered an important step towards recreating a positive relationship between the colonists and the Indians. The marriage brought a season of peace to the region. In 1616, the couple sailed to England to improve financial support for the Virginia Company, a company that was owned by the wealthy Londoners that financed the Jamestown colony. The same company wanted to prove that they could meet their goal of converting Native Americans to Christianity, so Rolfe, Pocahontas, and their newborn son Thomas, and about a dozen of Powhatan Indians went with Sir Thomas Dale on his ship. Unfortunately, about a year later, in March of 1617, Pocahontas became ill with an unknown sickness. It was thought to be pneumonia or some other disease.
All right, hold on a sec. So you said that they took off and they came to England. Do you have anything on what it was like when they got to England? The Indian princess who had married a white man, that kind of thing. Any any detail on that? Because actually I was going to ask Mary. Looks like Mary had to rejoin us because you're having mic issues. But Mary, do you have anything on that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll let you jump in and kind of give us some detail on that before we talk about Pocahontas' death.
Oh, wait, where are we? Sorry, I just was letting you know that my mic was working.
Okay, do you have anything on when Pocahontas and her husband go to England and they're kind of what happens while they're there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Share that with me.
In the year 1616, Pocahontas and her husband were England bound in order to find financial support for the Virginia Company. When they arrived, the wealthy Londoners who financed the Jamestown colony sought to prove that they could convert Native Americans to Christianity. So her family and like a dozen Powhatan people toured all of England to show off like how tame they are. And then they settled down in like rural Brentford for some time thereafter.
Okay, and do you see my 4 pictures of Pocahontas here? Which of these pictures is the picture from England? If you could kind of say, upper right, upper left, lower right, lower left. Which one do you think is the picture from England?
probably the pictures on the right. Oh wait, yeah, the top left.
Top left, right? Because she's in traditional English clothing, because she's being introduced to high society there, like to the Queen and to others. And so, give us a little detail on that. Like, is this a big deal in England when you have this Indian princess who is converted to Christianity come to the country?
Yeah, it was a big deal. She met with the Queen and the King, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, they were all the rage, and it was just like a huge, deal that, it kind of was symbolic of the fact that they were bringing Christianity to the natives, and they were doing a good thing, instead of just making money, so to speak. So it was great PR for the London company / what would later become the Virginia company. So go ahead. I'll let you pick up from there.
Okay. Yeah, she settled in rural Brentford for some time thereafter, and apparently she met up with John Smith again, and they met, and they just talked for a while and stuff. And
Now,
then,
and can I just insert here? This is where John Smith is writing his memoirs. He's kind of writing another version of what he did while he was in the New World. And this is where he basically tries to make it seem like they had a romantic relationship and she saved him because she loved him, sort of thing. So that's where we get that story from. But in the original account, that is not in there, because he actually does do an account while he's over in the New World as well. So it's kind of funny when you look at the two primary sources, how different they are. So what, and I'm just asking this to anybody in the class, what would his motivation be for changing the story and kind of writing down some dishonest history?
Ego.
Okay.
It makes him look like he was saved out of some sort of, that he was just so great they had to save him, rather than it being a situation where they were just curious.
Okay. Obviously, it makes him more important. I think that's an excellent point. Anybody else have a thought?
I have a theory as well. This is
Okay,
Faith.
go ahead. Go ahead, Faith.
I think because of Pocahontas's popularity after she married John Rolfe, I think that was definitely part of it. He was like, oh, well, everyone's talking about her. If I say that we had some sort of fling or something, it'll cause a scandal and people will start paying attention to me.
Yeah, I think that's that, and that was actually the other point I was going to bring up. So excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent insight. So, yeah, John Rolfe is basically just trying to get some good PR, and being dishonest in the process, according to what we believe. Anything else, either Lauren or Mary, on kind of the tragic, end to the story of Pocahontas? And then if you have any follow-up on what happens to her son and all of that, that would be great as well.
I like to finish what I had.
Okay, great. Yeah, Lauren, so pick up right there.
I left off. Unfortunately, about a year in March of 1617, Pocahontas became gravely ill with an unknown sickness that was thought to be pneumonia or some other disease, but some speculate that she could have been poisoned. It is told that her last words were, "All must die, but 'tis enough that my child liveth."
Okay. And again, we have to take all that with a grain of salt in terms of, is her husband trying to make her look good? But probably, it probably was her last words. And then, what do we likely believe? Like, if you're trying to figure out what killed her, what's the mainline theory? Is it poison or is it something else?
Me?
Yeah, anyone who wants to answer, but go ahead, Lauren.
I don't know, with her traveling a lot and her immune system not really being the same as those from London or any other place, it probably was just a common like flu disease or pneumonia or other sickness that her body just couldn't handle.
You are correct. Yeah, that is the mainline historical interpretation, that she just caught some disease that she hadn't built up immunity to, and there are so many in Europe. So just kind of an unfortunate victim of that whole biological kind of epidemic sort of thing that was continuing to happen. All right, and do you have any further detail, anything else you'd like to add?
I have a section about the effects of colonization and also some on John Rolfe himself.
Okay, run through some of that quick for us, and we're going to try to move along here, so keep it on the highlights, and then I'll ask Mary also if she has anything else she'd like to add.
All right. Well, with the effects of colonization that the Native Americans had to go through, within a short time period, Native life was pretty much changed forever. The changes were like they lost their land, they were introduced to disease, laws were enforced that violated their culture, and just a lot. When the Europeans arrived, they brought with them diseases that were really unknown. Along with that, they brought guns and horses, which changed the way the hunter-gatherers killed their food. So while some of the effects brought on by the invasion on the colonies were like unintentional, no one had thought about the immunity.
Yeah.
And they also killed off the entire bison population, or at least most of it.
Well, we're getting to that way later. So yes, but very good. Yeah, you are jumping ahead to something that we will discuss later in the year. All right, excellent job, Lauren. Mary, did you have any additional detail? Did you find anything on kind of what happens to John Rolfe and, oh, I'm sorry, Lauren, did you want to add anything on John Rolfe?
I can, but Mary can if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, Mary, do you have anything?
I don't really have much on John Rolfe. I just know that like her son Thomas was like left behind in England with relatives because he was ill, and then John went on to Virginia.
Yes, John went back to his plantation in Virginia because, of course, that was the source of their family's wealth. He had to continue to cultivate tobacco and grow his plantation. Thomas will eventually grow up as a British national. I mean, he will identify as British and will serve later in the British military in North America as we get further into some of the conflicts that arise later on. So he definitely has a very interesting life story as well. And then, Lauren, did you want to add anything in addition to that?
No, I just have more of his stuff from before he met Pocahontas, so I don't really know if that really goes along with the whole thing.
Okay, no, yeah, I mean, we've pretty much hit the important highlights. So that is the story of Pocahontas. Definitely has become part of our American folklore to a certain extent, and as a result has been somewhat distorted, but that's kind of the more historically accurate version. All right, so kind of moving on, we are now kind of moving in because John Rolfe has gotten the ball rolling by showing that yes, it is possible to make a profit and really become somebody, so to speak, by starting a plantation in Virginia, because the demand for tobacco is off the charts in Europe. I mean, if you can grow a lot of it, you can make a lot of money. And so Jamestown realizes that that is a prime motivating factor for people. And so what they do is they introduce something called the headright system. And they say, if you show up, we will give you 50 acres to farm. It will be yours. We will give you the quote unquote deed to the land. Now, of course, that may mean that land is still partially under the control of Native Americans, or you may have to, that's your problem, so to speak. You have to deal with that. But technically, according to the Jamestown colony, you own the land. You have people who are kind of coming across trying to get that 50 acres and start their farm and, build a fortune. But there's a way to game the system. Say you're already there and you're already established. Can anybody see a possible way to game the system and get more land for yourself and add to the land you already have?
You just spook off the people coming in because you know the land better, or ruin their land, like you move a river somewhere, you irrigate it so it floods it, a portion of it, so they get scared off.
Okay, you could, absolutely. But I'm thinking of how do you game the headright system in order to get more 50-acre plots?
Have family,
your family over.
Coming over.
Okay, that is definitely a possibility. What if there was somebody who's willing to come over but couldn't afford it?
You pay for them to come over, and then
you take some of their land for taking them over here.
Right. Okay, so you say, okay, I'll pay your passage if you'll come across and but I get your head right. But then again, you know, you get over to the new world and you can start building your fortune. And then later it's like, I'll pay your passage in for your head right, and for or for part of your head right, again, the contracts varied, and for your labor for a certain number of years. So this is where we get what is known as the indentured servant system, where you agree, you sign a contract to work for somebody for so many years, in order to pay for your passage to the new world. So this, of course, is in response to a pressing need in the new world for what? What do they need? Like, you can make a ton of money, you can grow tobacco, but the pressing need is for what?
It needs people to work land.
Okay, so yes, so Braden, you need people to actually work the land, and so of course this is going to make some people who are a little creative think, well, instead of going through all this trouble to get an indentured servant and pay for their passage, why don't I just enslave people? Okay, so the first people that were enslaved were Native Americans. And yes, this is kind of one of those, stories that has been forgotten in American history. But what do you think the reason is that Native American slavery doesn't really take off? It doesn't really last for very long.
They don't have the same immunity to European diseases.
Okay, so yes, and I don't know if that was Nick or Jacob Mann saying that, but
it was me.
All right, so it was Nick. All right, yeah. So yeah, they don't have that that hardiness, that built up immune system. And actually, in a way, this was like a blessing in disguise for the Native Americans, because this meant that they wouldn't be targeted for slave labor, because the longer you are a slave, the more your system is going to be stressed. And so of course, what is this going to lead to? Who will be substituted in for Native Americans, just like they were
Africans.
Yeah, Africans.
Africans. Okay, so if you've heard of the 1619 Project, the New York Times is trying to, re-emphasize some history that often gets lost, often gets ignored, and that is that the history of slavery begins in the 13 colonies in 1619, when the first group of African slaves are brought to the shores of Virginia. Now, of course, if you want to get technical, there were African slaves in what is now South Carolina and what is now Florida, and that was under the Spanish. But really, the slave trade becomes a very well-established, profitable thing because of the tobacco industry in Virginia, because there's so much demand. So that is, of course, going to be a story that we're going to be following. And at first, actually, they treated the African slaves with with a lot more respect, because they're like, well, you're like an indentured servant. You can work and eventually attain your freedom. But as time goes by, they're like, well, this doesn't make any economic sense. Why not just hold on to them for life? And so this is, as time goes by, things become more and more restrictive in regard to the slaves that were being brought in to do the agricultural labor. And this is kind of a summary slide, because I could have split this up into like 3 or 4 slides, with all the various things that happen, and kind of keep those all in chronologically, but it just gets so complicated that it's just easier to do it this way. Things get ugly between the Powhatan and the Virginian colonists. Why do you think that is an inevitable thing, based on what Virginia's model is for bringing people over, and why people are there? What do Virginians want that Native Americans don't want to give them, which is
land.
Yeah, land. Okay, so this is something that was inevitable. It's really a kind of a sad story in a lot of ways, but here's how things work. Okay, so you got Chief Powhatan's brother, we talked about, Opechaniku, who is, again, we've discussed this, he's worried about, the encroachment on their lands. And so he decides the best way to deal with that is with a sudden blitz, like just a surprise attack that just, because he's kind of, Mr. He takes things and he just wants to go to the extreme. He's kind of an extreme guy. And so in 1622, Opechanigu and his warriors just suddenly, without warning, attack these settlements that had grown up outside of Jamestown. And they massacre every single man, woman, and child in these settlements, just completely annihilating the white population. And Jamestown could have been taken out too, and this could have been the end of the Jamestown colony had it not been for a friendship between one of the colonists and a teenage native boy who I can't remember his name, but that he warned him because he liked him and he didn't want him to die. He warned him that something was coming, and Jamestown was prepared, and they manned their walls, and so they were able to fight off the attack on Jamestown itself. But this was an incredible amount of death and destruction. It is called the Indian Massacre of 1622. So there's continued fighting. Of course, the London Company sends in more soldiers. And the colonists are eventually able to negotiate a truce with the natives, but they want revenge. And so they have this, like, hey, let's have a big party to celebrate our truce kind of thing. And the wine that they pass out to the natives is laced with poison. And so they kill about 200 Native American warriors, Powhatan warriors, with this poison. Again, there is kind of, some fighting and then peace is established again. But in 1644, so this is a good 20 years later, Opechanigu basically starts what we call the Second Anglo-Powhatan War with another surprise attack, ends up killing 400 settlers this time, so more than the Indian Massacre of 1622. But there's just too many white people, and the numbers of the Powhatan keep dwindling. And so, if they're not able to wipe everybody out completely, then more soldiers come. And so eventually they are able to break the back of the Powhatan Confederacy and destroy it. And that ends the resistance by the Powhatan to Virginia's expansion. So that's kind of a nutshell version of a, what was a long tragic history, which, often people see that as inevitable. But we do have other settlers who come across the ocean who have a different motivation. And just a little bit of background, when people, King James in 1611 is going to officially have the Bible translated into English, which was something that the Catholic Church had resisted for a really long time. They had persecuted people who had translated the Bible into various languages, including English. But this was a king because he is now in charge of his own church. Henry VIII had taken the English people out of the Catholic Church, had established the Anglican Church with the king as the head and the Archbishop of Canterbury as the guy underneath him. And so there was an English version of the Bible. What do you think that's going to lead to in terms of possible problems for the Anglican Church now that everybody can read the Bible for themselves?
They can't lie to the people like they did before, like with the what was it, the indulgences? They basically made stuff up so that they can make money off of the people abusing the religion.
Excellent. Okay, so yes, if you take AP Euro, if you've done world history and you know about Martin Luther, reacting against the indulgences, the Catholic Church would often stick stuff in their doctrine that was not in the Bible. And there were people who are like kind of being literalists. They're like, well, it's not in here. How can you say that? It's not in here, And so once you translate something, you open it up to everybody having their own interpretation, which is why the Catholic Church didn't do it for so long. So we have a movement in Europe, I'm sorry, in England, against the Anglican Church, because the Anglican Church still had its own traditions, and this was a movement to purify it. So those people who want to purify it are called the Puritans. And there's going to be a giant civil war in England, which we'll touch on. That results from that, or partially from that. The there's another group that was like, you know what, the Anglican Church is beyond redemption. We can't purify it. So we're just going to leave, and we're going to start our own community, and we're going to have our own church, which is actually the way it's supposed to be. Like, you know, it's going to be, and of course they at first were in England and were persecuted, and then they moved to the Netherlands, and their people were you know, becoming more and more Dutch, and they were blending into the Dutch population. And so they're like, we can't stay here. We have to keep our people separate. We have to live this vision. And so they get on a ship that was commissioned by the Plymouth Company to come across to the New World. And they made up about 40% of the passengers that were heading to the New World. And of course, that ship is the Mayflower, which has gone down in American folklore as kind of this ship, this mythical ship that comes across. And as they come across, the question is, since they make up about half of the people who are coming over, what kind of a society are we going to have once we get there? Now, what's their motivation for coming here?
Religious freedom, mainly from the church.
Right. They want to establish their own religious, you know, system that is you know, the way they want it. And so they're not there to make money. They're there to survive and practice their religion the way they want to. So you have the pilgrims, who have a tendency to be a little more, you know, forthright and kind of take charge. They basically establish what is known as the Mayflower Compact. Now, why do we care about the Mayflower Compact? This is an agreement as to what society is going to look like, and they write it down on a piece of paper. Why is that significant?
Because it
Wasn't
would
that like
kind of
one
like
of
a
the first-
proto-constitution, you know. It's one of the first forms of written government.
Okay, so yes, Max. Yes, it like we like to trace back. When did we stop putting a king as the guy who was the leader, and instead we put a piece of paper in the place of the king, which of course is what our Constitution is. You know, nobody can break those rules. It applies to everyone. So this is kind of possibly where that idea, you know, gets started. But the Mayflower Compact is where they establish the civil government. They do provide for some democracy, the rule of the majority, and the separation of church and state is in there. But of course, since everybody is like very Christian and goes to church, and the pilgrims have a tendency to kind of win over the other settlers to become part of their churches, like there is not the separation of church and state that you would think would be established by that document. It is endemic in society at the time. And of course, they set foot on shore, and somebody had the idea of saying, hey, this is the rock right here where they first set down, according to what I'm reading. And then somebody stamped a date in the rock, which got worn away. But most likely that's more of a touristy thing, and it's not actually the rock. We don't know which rock they stepped on, and it'd be very hard to tell. But William Bradford, Miles Standish, William Brewster, and others are the ones who kind of create this new society in what is now Massachusetts. Okay, so further up the coast from Virginia, with, again, different weather, different climate, it's going to have an effect on what you can and can't grow. And that's going to lead to a situation similar to what you had with Jamestown with their first winter. What's the problem that Europeans have when they first come to the New World? They think, oh, they're thinking all military-ish, you know, when they're establishing things, but really they should be thinking more what?
Food and supplies.
Yeah, and
Okay, So who just said that? Because I missed that real quick. Who said food and supplies?
Me, Boyer.
All right, Boyer. Okay, so yeah, they should be thinking, and of course, you're not going to be able to bring enough supplies. Oftentimes the supplies will get wet. People will go through them too quickly. So what do you need to learn to do in order to actually survive in the new world?
Grow food.
The land.
Grow food.
Yes. Okay, you need to learn how to work the land. So we have a terrible winter. About half of the people die. It's the way it always is when you have these new groups come over, and the survivors are, doing what you guys said. They're trying very hard to get plants to grow, and they're putting seeds in the ground, and they're noticing that they're not getting good results. That the seeds aren't, a lot of them are sickly plants, and they're despairing. They're like, what are we going to do? And they're, of course, praying for some sort of answer. And into their village walks a Native American who speaks English. And he says, welcome. Now, he doesn't speak great English. He speaks kind of broken English. But why do you think there are Native Americans who actually speak English?
Because
They
they
can
were brought into slavery.
Talk to Europeans and all that.
Okay, there's, yes, contact with Europeans. Who said they were brought in via slavery?
Kinsey.
Kinsey. Okay, thank you, Kinsey. Yeah, I mean, those are all possible ways that someone could learn. And of course, up north, there were English ships that would come up to the shore and would trade with natives. And would, they would say, so some natives would come out on some rowboats. They would have, pelts and other things. And then the English would basically say, okay, here's this. And they would just trade. So as time went by, they would learn words and kind of have some ability to speak English. Well, Samoset happens to be what we call a sagamore. He is a sub-chief. He's kind of like a wandering chief. He's establishing diplomatic relations with other tribes. And he's from the Abenaki tribe further north, but he's establishing diplomatic ties with the Wampanoag, which are the tribe of the area. So make sure you have this down. The Wampanoag are the tribe that you are going to see a lot of interaction with the people who come to Massachusetts, okay, which is different from the Powhatan. Again, there's often a lot of confusion there. And he basically, he talks to them, and then he says, I'll return. And 2 days later, he returns with a very interesting character. A guy who has, of course, gone down in American folklore, but has a really interesting story, and that is Squanto. And Caden, I noticed that this is yours. Did you want to, I saw you on the list here, but did Caden disappear? Oh, looks like he did disappear. All right, well, Squanto is, or Tisquantum as he was called, he was a member of the Pauxtet tribe. And he was actually part of one of those groups of natives that went out and would trade with the Native Americans. And I'm sorry, with the English, as they would come close to the shore with their ships and offer to, exchange goods. And while he was lifting stuff up onto the ship, he was kind of just serving as labor as a teenager. The English grabbed him and pulled him up onto the ship and kidnapped him, taking him back to England. And there's a movie that was made about him. Of course, again, with Hollywood, they're trying to sell you on a movie, so it's a little, and this was made a while ago, not like super long ago, but you'll be able to tell that it's not as slick as your more current productions. But this is going to give you at least a little bit of a picture of some of his adventures and how he becomes so important later on when the Pilgrims are interacting with him. So this is the trailer for Squanto, A Warrior's Tale.
A proud young brave, born to be a leader. A beautiful young woman, destined to be his bride. In an untamed land, the moment was his. Sponsor the tribes! Are you sure? Until he was ripped from his world and forced into another. Can't run away from me, Indian. I own you now. On your feet, savage. Beast. Livestock. Ladies and gentlemen, Sparta the Savage. I've got a gold mine here, Hardy. A gold mine. Whoever this creature is, he needs our help. I miss my family, my people. We know he's here, Friar. Hand him over. You have risked your life for a friend, President. I must do the same. Walt Disney Pictures presents the epic journey that taught a warrior to believe in himself. You have forgotten who you are. I have not forgotten. Two worlds to believe in the future. This land, too many tears.
Okay. So again, it's Walt Disney, which is notorious for like basically telling tales that aren't true about history and confusing everybody. What do you notice immediately is one of the obvious problems based on what we just discussed between that and the actual version of events? What you saw.
Sounds like they tried to make it into a love story.
Of course, you have to do that in Hollywood if you want people to watch your movie. But what else?
On a bear.
Okay. The fighting of the bear. Now, they actually did have him do gladiatorial type stuff, and there is some primary source reference to a bear, but again, there is some dispute as to whether or not they actually had a bear and how big it was. What else?
She was like,
I saw the whole "you've forgotten who you are, you need to discover who you are again" or something.
Okay.
Wasn't
Okay.
it when he came home, his whole tribe had been wiped out by disease, so he didn't really have a tribe to come back to.
Excellent. Yes, Elizabeth. So we he's like, the great peacemaker between, the natives, and you have Plymouth, and they're all, ready to go to war, and the pilgrims, and notice the guy in the helmet and everything, and he's the one who walks out in the middle of the battlefield and says, enough, but actually what happens is, and some of this movie is accurate to what he went through. He did get kidnapped. He did spend 9 years in Europe. Part of that was as a slave, and part of that was, on the run. And he was helped by some monks who did help him get back to the New World on a ship. But when he returns, he finds that his entire village is gone, and it was wiped out by the epidemics that were sweeping through the New World. Every time Europeans set foot, there's new waves of epidemics that sweep through. And so he's alone. His family is gone, but he has something that makes him unique. What does he have that makes him like unique and valuable to other tribes?
Bilingual.
Okay, very good. He is bilingual, and he doesn't just have a little bit of broken English like Samoset. He speaks English very well because he learned it while he was over in Britain. And so that, of course, is going to make him the ideal ambassador between the two. So Samoset returns with Squanto, and Squanto is like, what's going on? What's your problem? And they're like, you must be an answer to prayer. We can't grow food, and we're starving. And so he's like, oh, here, you see these little minnows you can catch in the creek? Take a little minnow and put it next to the seed when you plant it. And of course, what's that going to do for the plant?
Fertilize the soil.
Yeah, it's going to fertilize it. So that is going to basically make it so they are able to. So there are all these little tricks of the trade that the natives had learned, and he just teaches the pilgrims all of them, or a lot of them anyway. And this makes it so the Plymouth colony can survive. And of course, they see it as an answer to prayer. Squanto, who is now kind of this wandering wise man, who is, of course, trying to, he's basically looking to make his own way and get rich and get higher up in the hierarchy of other tribes. And by exploiting his ability to talk to the whites. But that, of course, leads to diplomatic relations with the Wampanoag. So Chief Massasoit, who is the leader of the powerful Wampanoag tribe in the region, which again is another confederacy. It's 7 tribes that are actually confederated together, but it's like the Powhatan and the Iroquois, a tribal confederacy. He has heard some things about what's been going on in Virginia. So what do you think, what kind of things do you think have kind of filtered up, through the tribes, through people talking to each other?
The wipeouts of them?
Yeah. And so Robert, what do you think he's thinking about? There's this new group of whites. I've got to talk to these people. What will happen if we do what the Powhatan do, which is we just try to wipe them out. We just try to get rid of them. What's going to happen to us?
Then they're going to die too.
Right. It didn't work out well for the Powhatan. More soldiers come across. So what's the other option? If you don't want to go down that road, which leads to all this bloodshed and eventually the destruction of your tribe, which is what happens to the Powhatan, what's the other possible road?
Diplomacy.
Okay, yes. So very good, Autumn, and I saw Nick and some others, and Scott. Yes, diplomacy. So, basically, Massasoit sees a possibility here. Well, we can talk to each other because we can use Squanto as our interpreter. Let's negotiate a peace treaty. So on March 22nd, 1621, he uses Squanto as his kind of diplomat, and the two sides, and of course Squanto is getting what he wants out of things, and he has a lot of power because he can kind of interpret things the way he wants to, but the two of them negotiate this peace treaty and an alliance, because the Wampanoag don't just have problems with whites, they have problems with another powerful tribe in the region known as the Narragansett. So Massasoit sees this as an opportunity to do two things. Not only can we defeat the Narragansett, but we can also, avoid, conflict with the whites. And so this works out to the benefit of both sides, and they form this alliance. So of course that leads us to something which has gone down in American folklore.
This is my slide.
Yes, and Kenzie, I was just about to say your name. So one of the things that we have to figure out when we discuss Thanksgiving is, and the quote first Thanksgiving is, what is legend and what is real? And, so what really happened? And then how does that translate over to the things that you learn in elementary school about Thanksgiving? I'm sure many of you did the little play when you were in elementary school where some of you were pilgrims and some of you were Native Americans. I don't know if they still do that anymore, but it was common when I was young. It does seem to have this persistent kind of, existence in our folklore. So now we're kind of looking at the college level version of what actually happened versus what we think happened, what impression we have. So Kenzie, I'll let you take it away, and just keep in mind that we're trying to sort this out, and feel free, Kenzie, to ask questions of the people who are all present, and we can all kind of hash this out as we go.
Okay, cool. So, as you all know, we were told in elementary school the basics, and definitely we weren't told all of it. So
It's
here we
fine
go.
now. It's just I missed like 30 minutes of instruction.
Okay, so Jacob, there will be like a video of this, and I will post it for you. So no worries. So go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, so Thanksgiving, as told to us, was a small snippet of what happened. We, of course, know the Pilgrims were there and that they had contact with the natives. So, yeah, they since the Wampanoag met the Pilgrims, of course, and they had become allies. I'm sorry, I'm like stressing out. So, since then, Squanto became like an interpreter for the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims. And Squanto had taught them, of course, how to grow their crops, their corn, and how to hunt and get all supplies they needed. So since they had gotten the corn, they had had their first successful harvest, and they were celebrating that harvest by having the meal Thanksgiving.
All right, and before you go any further, let me just interrupt for a sec. Kenzie just said something very important. They introduce a crop to the Pilgrims, which is one that really sustains people. And of course, it's always part of those little Thanksgiving celebrations we have. And what is that crop again?
Corn.
Maize.
Corn/maize, which we talked about earlier. So just kind of highlighting that important thing that she said. So go ahead, Mackenzie.
To celebrate the success from the harvest, in October of 1621, they had a 3-day celebration entailing wild fowl and other foods. At this point, there were a total of 90 Native Americans and 53 Pilgrims. The wild fowl consisted of ducks, geese, and swan. Weirdly, unlike today turkey, was not confirmed to be a part of the meal. Stuffing as well was different because it was stuffed birds and fish. It was filled with herbs and onions. In addition, they obviously had the harvest. And the Wampanoag brought deer. I believe it was 5 deer. And today's celebrations may look different, but they originated from the first celebration. It became a tradition that was set by, I believe, George Washington.
Right. George Washington recognized it in a national decree, but who made it into a holiday, which is like a federal holiday, like a national?
Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, in 1863, in the middle of the Civil War, again, as a way to try to unite people and to turn the country towards God in the midst of a very dark struggle. All right, so you mentioned the whole. Let's talk about turkey. Why do you think turkey gets put into Thanksgiving later as one of the primary things that we eat? Anybody have a theory? Because there are lots of possibilities here, but I just want to see what people think.
Is it more prevalent in areas like it's easier to get?
Okay, what else?
You can technically like farm turkey a lot easier than wild fowl like geese and duck.
Okay.
Some of the bird, I know like there was a specific type of pigeon they used to eat a lot, and they literally hunted it to extinction at one point. They're like cardofowl, they overhunted quite a bit, which is why turkey probably came into the picture later.
Okay. Think about our slide on the Columbian Exchange.
Wasn't it one of the only like native cattle to the Americas? Because
right.
like
one of the
everything else is from Europe.
Right. One of the few. Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, one of the few livestock that goes from the New World to the Old World. So just it's an emblematic piece of livestock of what was available here, not things that were brought over. Because remember, most of the livestock, cows, horses, sheep, pigs, etc., all came from the Old World to the New World. Turkey and llamas were one of the few things that the New World already had, aside from bison, which were far away in the Great Plains, and of course deer and other things. So, Kenzie, what's the difference between the Thanksgiving that was celebrated back then and how people at the time saw it? Like, how did the natives see it? How did the Pilgrims see it?
They saw it as a celebration of their harvest because, of course, after the harsh winter where a lot of them had died off, they had finally had a successful harvest, and they were definitely thankful to God because they were heavily focused on their religion. So it was definitely a celebration to God, to Squanto, and I might pronounce this horribly wrong, but the Wampanoag? I don't know.
Wampanoag, yeah, very good.
Yeah.
So,
But
okay,
it was
so
definitely a celebration of that.
So I just want to emphasize what Kenzie said there, that this to the natives was a harvest celebration, which they did every year. Okay, so in our folklore, how do we see this? Who's the one who invites who, and who's the one who's basically leading the whole thing according to our folklore?
We see that the pilgrims invite the natives
Yes.
to come have their feast with them, and the feast was organized by their governor, William Bradford.
Right. But it's like the pilgrims are the Christian sophisticated ones, and they're the civilized ones, right? According to our folklore. And the natives are seen as these brutes, these people who don't have much civilization, who are coming in and who are partaking in this meal and this Christian celebration, when really the natives are actually very sophisticated in their own right and saw this as another harvest celebration that they were sharing with their new allies against the Narragansett. All right, so that is Thanksgiving. Now again,
I have a quote as well, by the way.
okay, yeah, and why do we call it Thanksgiving? Because we do need to mention why this is significant religiously to the pilgrims, and how this plays into our later religious way of looking at things here in America, because for a long time, religion does saturate our culture and really informs the way we look at things. This is a holiday which has a lot of religious significance. So let's look at it from the pilgrims' point of view for a minute. How did they see it?
They definitely saw it as they had just separated from the church, and it was very important to them because, of course, they were able to have their own religious freedom now, and they were very thankful to God for giving this to them since they had left.
Okay, all right. Like they were on the edge of starvation. They were going to die, and then suddenly God saves them, and so they're thankful. So with Squanto and Samoset. So that is the pilgrim point of view, which again, for a long time was very, very much the way that our country saw this as this becomes more of a national thing. Kenzie, go ahead, and anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, I have a quote.
All right, go ahead.
This was from Edward Winslow to a friend on December 11th, 1621. Our corn did prove well, and God be praised, we had a good increase of Indian corn. Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling so that we might, after a special manner rejoice together after we had gathered the fruit of our labors. At which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, many of the Indians coming amongst us, and amongst the rest their great king Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted, and they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor and upon the captain and others.
So if you're interpreting that primary source quote that you're looking at there, what interesting things do you notice when you look at that quote?
That they were very thankful to the natives.
Okay. All right. And how do they see the natives? Like
They
what's
see them as allies.
okay? They're military allies. Yeah, and you do kind of catch a sense that they don't necessarily see them as sophisticated and as civilized as they are, which again is one of those things that we're trying to correct the history and make it more where we're looking at things the way they actually looked at them back then. That's not necessarily true, but that's the first Thanksgiving. So excellent job, Kenzie. All right, and that takes us to another slide where we're going to take a lot of history and compress it into kind of one small area. But the Dutch had basically followed up on Henry Hudson's 1609 expedition into up the Hudson River and into what is now, New York City area. And this led to the general, this Dutch general, Peter Minuit, who led some colonists, some Dutch colonists in 1621 to this area to offer the natives. And again, this is one of those things where it plays into that whole stereotype that we were just discussing. $24 in trinkets and beads for Manhattan Island. Now, how does this play into the stereotype? Anybody want to
They
speculate?
kind of portray it as natives were too stupid to know value.
Right. Oh, those dummies, they just sold it for $24 in trinkets. Anybody want to look at it from the native point of view? Why might they be willing to trade this island for like a small number of trinkets? What would they possibly get out of the deal that we're not seeing?
This is $24 of stuff they've never seen before in exchange for land, which, like, they think they own the whole continent, essentially. They could just move away if they really wanted to.
What value could these new whites have? This is a new pattern established by Massasoit. Instead of fighting the whites, you give them a little area, and then the whites become what?
Diplomatic.
Okay, I heard that from several people. They're allies. Yeah, so these are now your military allies. So Scott, what might the tribes in the area be thinking these new whites that were showing up could possibly, because I just saw that your mic was on there and you were answering, what could they possibly be giving the natives in the area as they're, of course, dealing with their own politics and their own, situation?
Well, I mean, if they trade with those people, they could give them protection from other Europeans that may come.
Okay, for other Europeans, but also think about you have tribes fighting each other. If you're the first to establish relations with the whites, what could the whites give you that would?
You have a big army. Now no one wants to mess with you.
Okay, so not only could they provide soldiers, but what new thing could they bring?
Guns.
Guns. Yes, excellent. So they could bring guns, and that would basically give them an advantage. So, we see this, purely from the European point of view. Oh, they're so dumb. They're so, they're such brutes. They only paid $24 for it. But really, if you look at it from the Native American point of view, it's much different. Now, the Dutch establish this this society where you have these rich landowners who essentially run plantations. They call them patroons. And this guy right here, Governor Stuyvesant, becomes the new governor of the colony in 1647. And he kind of is an overbearing guy, but establishes New Amsterdam as this colony as a power in the area. And it really does become a competing power with the British colonies to the south and to the west, to the east of them, but also with Native Americans. And of course, they are seeking alliances with this Dutch power. But the Dutch don't have that many men. And there's going to be this kind of trading off of things that happens in Europe. So often what happens in European wars is they'll say, okay, we're going to come to the peace table and we'll trade you this territory that we took in this particular part of Europe, which again, Europeans considered much more valuable, for this territory that you have over in the New World. So there was a trade that was made, and not to get too far into European history, just to make a long story short, New Amsterdam is traded to the English, and the English end up renaming the colony as New York. And of course, Stuyvesant was very unpopular. So this transition from Dutch power to English power wasn't too hard of a sell for the people who were living there because they saw him as too overbearing. So they're like, yeah, please give us a different overlord because this guy is too much. And so that kind of made for a smooth transition into New York becoming an English colony. Again, we're jumping forward into history and telling you what happens in the 1660s, even though we're not there yet. All right, so now Massachusetts is established as a colony by uniting two different groups. The first group is one we've already discussed, and that my little pointer here is on their area. This was the Plymouth Pilgrims, okay? But in 1628 and 1629, there was something known as, well, and then again in 1630. So in those 3 years, there was something known as the Great Migration, where 1,000 Puritan colonists, okay, remember Puritan, meaning they wanted to purify the church instead of completely separating from it, which makes them different from the Pilgrims, across the ocean. And they established two great cities, which were Salem and Boston. And like, you know, the other colonies, the people who showed up were not prepared for living in the wilderness, and 200 colonists die of disease, cold, and starvation, although they do have the Pilgrims to talk to. And so, and then 200 more returned to England thinking this is just too hard, I can't do it. But by 1640, over 20,000 Puritans will have emigrated, and that is because of politics in England, where the Anglican kind of powers that be will get the upper hand and will persecute Puritans. Again, this is all going to lead to the English, partially going to be part of what leads to the English Civil War, but there's also other parts too. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony is really a uniting of the separatists who really do follow this kind of more literal version of the Bible that they have come up with, and the Puritans. So they're both basically following that same interpretation, but one believes in purifying the church, one believes in separating from it. And we now need to talk about the Puritans, okay? So the Puritans subscribe to a version of Christianity, which is one of the many new little splinter Protestant denominations that are basically evolving from different people's interpretations of the Bible. So you have Martin Luther's version, very popular in Germany. You have this guy in Switzerland named John Calvin, whose interpretation of the Bible will become very popular in numerous areas, including France and England. And has anyone ever heard of Calvinism, or like the 5-point
predestination thing?
Predestination, very good. Yes, Zachary. So explain that to us, because that is the big sticking point. That is what separates Calvinists from other denominations of Christianity. What is predestination?
I haven't studied it in a while, but my understanding was opposed to the normal Christian idea that if you at any point in your life accept, you know, Jesus as your savior, you can go to heaven and you are a Christian. It's that when you are born is when it's determined whether you are a Christian or not, and you are or you aren't. There is real no conversion.
Okay, so in other words, God picks you at birth. Like, you're part of a group known as the elect. And basically, you're going to convert at some point in your life. They call it the hound of heaven will chase you down. And it is funny how all the people who believe this just so happen to be part of the elect. You know, like the Puritans are like, yeah, we're all part of that group. And so do you have to go out and try to convert other people if you're a Calvinist?
No, because you don't necessarily believe that people can be converted unless they're part of the elect.
Okay, so there's really no need for being an evangelist, no evangelicalism. By the way, this whole interpretation will become known as the Congregationalist Church. So if you're looking at, you know, churches in our country, this particular, the Puritan Church, will become the Congregationalist Church. There is another Calvinist denomination which becomes very popular as well, known as the Presbyterians. And of course, predestination was big back then, but it has kind of faded since then. What's the opposite interpretation of
of predestination. Instead of being picked by God at birth, being one of the elect, you are actually what's the other way of looking at it?
You earn your way into heaven through your actions on earth.
Okay, well, that's actually considered a heresy, where you can earn your salvation. That is rejected by both Puritans and other Christians. But often people still think that way, that you have to earn your way. But no, it's by the grace of God you are saved. You don't have the ability to save yourself. But if you're not being selected by God at birth, what would be the other option? That we all have what? And we all can do what?
We all have free will to do whatever we want to.
Yes, free will. Okay, and so that is something known as Arminianism, and so this is kind of a struggle that Christianity goes through for a while, which is which one's correct, Calvinism or Arminianism? Are we selected by God? And this is actually based out of some passages in Romans where it says they were predestined. Like that word is actually used in some passages in Romans, and they were like God foreknew them. So here are the 5 points of Calvinism. And for those of you who have some familiarity with the church, you will hear people say things like, "Oh, I'm a 4-point Calvinist," which means they subscribe to 4 out of the 5 points. So some of these are things that every Christian believes, but some of them are a little more controversial. So let's roll through them real quick here. Total depravity, which means everybody's a sinner. Okay, that's something that all Christians, you can't save yourself. You're a sinner. You're in need of grace. Unconditional election. This is where it starts to get, controversial, where God has taken a certain number, a small group known as the elect. And again, this is also reflected in Revelation, where there's like a certain small group who are selected out of everyone. And those people are predestined to go to heaven, to be saved. Like they don't have a choice, that they will become Christians at one way or another at some point in their lives. And then there's limited atonement. In other words, Jesus didn't die for everyone. He only died for the elect. There's irresistible grace, where if you are one of the elect, like I said before, no matter how hard you fight, no matter how much you do, in the end, you will become a Christian and you will do what God wants. And then there is what is known as the perseverance of the saints. The elect can't lose their salvation. Like once you've been saved, you can't lose it.
What
So
a
again,
depressing ideology.
it is. Look, notice how they're all dressed in black. They're all the same. And this, because Boyer, I think you're hitting on something. This is, so like, it's like, if we don't have to go out and convert people, if the big focus is not being an evangelical and going out and converting other people and getting them saved, then what do we do for God? Like, if it's not to get converts, what do we do? And the answer is, well, out of gratitude for this gift, this mighty gift that has been bestowed upon you, you are to live a holy life. You have to live according to the Bible. Again, remember, they're going back to that literal interpretation of, they're trying to live by the letter of what they see in the New Testament. And they say we're going to be a, quote, city on a hill. What do you think they mean by that? A city on a hill?
You would be above other cities, like in a way, not necessarily looking down, but it's going to be a pinnacle that people look up to.
Okay. Olivia, I see your mic's on. What do you think?
I was actually going to ask you a question from what you were saying earlier about this topic.
Absolutely. Go ahead. What's your question?
So you said that the Calvinists couldn't convert anyone. I was kind of confused on if that was true. How come the interpretation was popular?
Okay. That's not a big emphasis for Calvin. There's like for the other side, Arminius, that's their huge emphasis, is go out and make converts of the world. But then the question is, if you don't convert anybody, how does it survive? Because once one generation dies out, if nobody gets converted, and they'll say, well, so-and-so is actually a member of the elect. We need to talk to them. That the hound of heaven is on their case. God is kind of tugging on their heart, so to speak. So that means you need to help the hound of heaven convince this person to do what they've already been predestined to do earlier in their life. You see how that works? It's kind of a, but they
Yeah,
do
that
make
makes more sense.
they do make converts. It's just that they're not as like, it's not a huge emphasis. Like for some branches of Christianity, it's a huge emphasis. That's like the thing that you're supposed to be focused on. But for Calvinists, it's not.
I
But
got
let's,
a question.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So are there any, is there any interpretations from the Calvinists that since I'm already saved, I'm just gonna do whatever I want? Like not even like the kind of Armenian kind of thing where I'm gonna try to convert people, but because I am already saved, there's no reason for me to do all of this in service to God because no matter what, I'm already going to heaven.
I mean, you are hitting on something that I was hoping to get to with the whole city on a hill thing. And that is, yeah, why not just live like a heathen if you're already saved? You know, you don't have to follow any rules. Well, the Puritans feel like if you do that, you're ungrateful. And this is where they blur the line between separation of church and state. They are a city on a hill. They are supposed to be an example to the rest of the world, a beacon of light. Everyone looks to them and realizes this is what Christianity is supposed to be. So, for committing various sins, where it could be anything from getting drunk in public to adultery, which was of course a huge sin. And again, just a little aside, we're going to hit on this later when we talk about Nathaniel Hawthorne, but is anybody familiar with the Scarlet Letter?
Yes.
Yeah, the lady in the Scarlet Letter, what did she have to do because she had committed adultery? She had sexual relations outside.
After she had her affair, didn't they force her to wear a red A on her dresses so that everybody knew that she was an adulteress?
Yes, she was shamed. Yes, and they would put you in the stocks, which is something that was done over in the medieval world. Does anybody know what that is? What is the stock?
Basically,
like a little like full body handcuff type thing, where they like throw stuff at you.
Yeah, your head and your hands are like in this thing where your head fits in there too, and you in front of the whole city. It's like in the town square, so everybody in the city can come by and like throw things at you and look at you and shame you. And so, in answer to your question, Zach, there is an enormous amount of social pressure to be grateful in the way you live your life, to combat that very problem, that logical issue there, because it is something that logically you'd be like, oh well, okay, I guess I can do what I want now, but they didn't want that, so they put all this societal pressure on people to quote be grateful by living a holy life. And so I want to ask this real quick: why do they all wear black?
I could be wrong about this, but wasn't it because like colors were super, super distracting or something like that, and they wanted to basically be a blank slate so that they were only focused on serving God?
Okay. Again, you have to look at this from kind of this Christian point of view. Braden, I see you raising your hand there. Go ahead. What do you think?
So would it be because I guess wearing fancy clothing would be like a way of showing off or being vain, and
Bingo.
so you would have to dress down so that you wouldn't be committing sins like that.
The sin of pride, yes. If you wear bright colors, you're trying to show off. You're trying to set yourself above everybody else. You're committing the sin of pride. And so therefore you must wear black and you must be humble, but it's like a forced humility. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, the like someone was saying earlier, I think it was Boyer, it does seem kind of drab. It does seem kind of depressing, and they do get a bad rap in some ways, the Puritans, but their philosophy is going to be incredibly influential. So when we're looking at this from a historical point of view, we have to understand where they're coming from, because this is incredibly influential in the Northeast for a while. Last thing I wanted to touch on with them is this idea of stratification, and this is something that you will often see in questions in the AP. So pay close attention. They believed that if you were wealthy, if your business was prospering, if your small farmer business was prospering, it was because God was happy with you. So they saw material gain and material wealth as a sign of God's blessing. So this is going to lead to a philosophy in the North that is much different. Like this is the seed of what will become the North in the country, just as what we talked about in Jamestown is the seed of what will become the South. And of course, those two will eventually clash in the Civil War. But what kind of outlook on life would you have if you felt like you had to, be grateful for what you had in terms of your gift of salvation, and the more you prospered, the more it would show that God was blessing you, and of course, other people it would raise your standing in the church and in the community, because other people would look to you and say, oh my, you seem to be very blessed. What would be, and they would look up to you, and you would become a deacon in the church, and then you would get to be a leader in the town and everything. What would you be motivated to do if that was the setup of society?
Kind of to try to keep other people sort of where they are and sort of bring yourself up on like a social ladder and sort
Okay.
of thing.
How do you get recognized by other people in the community as being a leader, as being blessed, as being someone that God has shown favor to? What is the sign of God's favor?
Basically,
You're
like
rich.
having a lot of money and property.
Isn't that wild? I mean, in this way of looking at things, the richer you are, the more God has blessed you, the more God is showing his blessing of your existence. So what would you want to do if you want to get ahead in life and you want to be seen as a leader in the town?
Encourage entrepreneurship.
Yeah, you'd work hard. Okay.
Get
So
rich quick.
well, yeah, you would like, and again, there's no slavery, there's no, like, you have your small farm, you have your business, so the only way to make it work is to just work harder. So there is an incredible work ethic that develops in the North out of this. What do we call that work ethic that is like kind of endemic to the whole northern part of our country eventually, but kind of comes out of this whole Puritan way of looking at things? The blank work ethic. Has anyone heard of it before? It starts with a P. Okay, I mean, this is just something that used to be talked about, which I guess is no longer a thing anymore, that nobody hears about, but they call it the Protestant work ethic. Has anyone heard that before? No? Okay. Well, Nick, did you have something you wanted to say? Because you had your mic on.
No, I was just going to kind of talk about how like the system kind of almost partnered like the rich get richer, and that they kind of like in that Puritan system, like not only are you getting a lot of money, and like you're also kind of being seen as a member, like a high standing member of the community, and that you're also just everything just kind of piles on and snowballs in that kind of situation.
Isn't that funny? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the richer you are, the higher your standing is, and the richer you can get, because of course you can continue to add to your wealth using your standing as a way of kind of influencing things so you can get richer. And so it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we end up getting this kind of rich upper class, this stratification. So that's what we like look at when we say socioeconomic stratification of Puritan society. People look down on you if you're poor. Like you're considered kind of, oh, that person must not be doing them. They must not be living very good, because look how poor they are. God's not blessing them. So there's this incredible social pressure to be prosperous, because prosperity is a sign of God's favor. So this is going to lead to a much different kind of society. So it's all very important. Make sure you have that down. And that, of course, is going to lead us to one of the first great rebels.
I have one question about the Puritans.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Boyd.
So as far as like the Bible and everything, like did they have their own book, like, the Torah or something, or did they just follow along with the standard?
A book of interpretation. You're saying, is there like a Talmud that is added to the Torah, or is there like or are you just saying, is there a set of scriptures that they go by?
Do they have like a separate book, or their own kind of book that they've made?
Okay, so there is no Book of Mormon that is like equal with Scripture. If you're asking,
Mm-hmm.
if that's kind of what you're asking, there is no that's a terrible sin. Like in the Scriptures, it says not one jot will be added, not one
Yeah.
be taken away, kind of thing. So it's like this is it. Like the Scriptures are it. So no, the King James Bible, the New Testament especially, but of course the whole thing, that is it. That is Scripture. But then you have various church leaders who write influential books on theology, because how do most people get their interpretation of, well, how do they get their Christianity, so to speak? They
I
go
mean,
go ahead.
from I guess from whoever leaders are teaching it and whatever they learn from the people around them.
Right. Every church, every Sunday they go to church, and the preacher is someone who has studied this, who has academically studied it, and of course they are then expounding that doctrine, which everybody must follow. And again, a lot of this is social pressure. Like people just want to be accepted. They want to feel like they're part of things. And it's hard to fight against that. It's a rare person who will stand up to social pressure and buck the trend and have the courage to do that, because there's all kinds of social consequences to doing that. So, did that answer your question though, Boyer?
Yeah.
Okay. And kind of that does segue really well into what we're just about to discuss, which is Anne Hutchinson. This lady is brave, okay, and she is also highly intelligent. And again, what does the Bible say? What does the New Testament say about women? Anybody know their New Testament well enough to answer?
Women aren't supposed to be the actual teachers.
Right.
That job is dedicated to men. Women can help and everything, but it's supposed to be a man's job to be a pastor or a priest.
Yeah. Notice the picture here with her head.
Let me correct myself. Women can't teach other men. Women can teach other women, but not other men.
Yes. And women are to keep their hair covered. This is in some of the letters of Paul. Women have to accept their subordinate position to men. But Anne Hutchinson is just this dynamo. She is she has a very sharp intellect. She also has a strong empathetic nature, and she and her husband arrive in 1634 with their 15 children. Okay, imagine trying to manage 15 children, and basically she holds Bible studies in her home. Now, women can do that, like you were mentioning, but men really aren't supposed. So she's not a preacher in a church teaching official doctrine to other men, but she is they're having this further discussion as a Bible study in her home. But she is so insightful, and her discussions are so lively and so thought-provoking that they're drawing huge crowds at her house, upwards of 80 people on Sunday afternoons. And so the church hierarchy sees her as a potential threat. And Zach, you have anticipated what Anne Hutchinson is going to say. So what was your insight earlier into one of the loopholes of Calvinism?
That if you're already saved, why not just do what you want?
Yeah. And so Anne Hutchinson basically kind of says, well, actually, if we're interpreting this correctly, you really should have more freedom to do what you want. We don't have to live under these strict rules, this city on a hill stuff. And that is where she crosses the line, because you're already saved no matter what you do. You've been predestined for salvation. And so they have a trial. Now, remember, they had said they were going to do the separation of church and state, but she's being put on trial primarily for religious offenses here, for preaching a doctrine that contradicts the doctrine that they've set up. And she and her husband are found guilty of heresy and are exiled from the colony. So we're going to come back to her story in a little bit, but she's the first rebel. So the Puritans and the Pilgrims come across the ocean for religious freedom. They want to practice their religion as they see fit, because they were persecuted in England. What are they now doing?
Persecuting other people.
They're persecuting people for the way they want to practice their religion. So it is kind of funny how the tables turn there. But that takes us to our second great religious rebel from this time, named Roger Williams. this guy is a talented young law student who could have become a lawyer and made a lot of money, but instead, because of his religious convictions, becomes a Puritan minister. And he came to Plymouth in 1631. And as he was a pastor there, and then after a couple of years, he moved over to the city of Salem, where he was a pastor. So again, he has a more powerful position than Anne Hutchinson because he is seen as an authority figure on how to interpret scripture. And he gets into a conflict with Massachusetts elders in 1635 for denouncing several practices. One of them is the confiscation of Native American lands. He's extrapolating from the scriptures that all people should be treated with, goodness and kindness and respect, and that includes Native Americans. And so he had a practice of treating them very well. And then he also said, we shouldn't be using civil authorities to punish people for purely religious offenses. Again, two things that nowadays we would totally agree with, but back then were seen as kind of going against the grain. And so he, after getting in conflict with the leaders in Massachusetts, just decides to leave. He takes his congregation with him and goes south and ends up in Narragansett territory. So remember, these are supposed to be the enemies. The Wampanoag had made a peace treaty with the Pilgrims to fight them, but he goes and actually kind of joins them, and he says, "Can I pay you for some land? We don't want much, but we want a small area to live in and to have farms and things like that." And so he paid the native tribes in the area what they considered to be a fair price for some land to live on. And of course, that is going to lead to the founding of a colony, which will be our smallest state. By the way, why is it our smallest state if you're extrapolating from his philosophy?
He probably didn't have much money
Taking
to
as
pay
little
for
land
it.
as possible from the natives.
Okay, so yes, Max and Elizabeth, yes. He's trying to be, he only has so much money, and you're paying a fair price to the natives, so it's going to be a small piece of territory. And so this leads to the founding of the colony of Rhode Island, which Anne Hutchinson will become one of the leading members of, and it becomes a haven for people who have been cast out of other parts of the New England colonies for various religious offenses, and that would include a group known as the Anabaptists, which are from a German sect, and we'll get to Baptists in a bit. They're kind of the proto-Baptists, Jews, Catholics, Quakers, which we're going to talk about in a bit, and French Huguenots. So it's kind of a hodgepodge. And what is the philosophy here if you've got all these various groups that are all coming to Rhode Island? What do you think is kind of the overriding philosophy when it comes to religion?
Live and let live.
Freedom.
Yeah, it's religious freedom. So that it kind of becomes this this haven. Now, Anne Hutchinson is one of the leaders, and after the death of her husband in 1643, she and 5 of her 15 children were up in New York in East Chester, and they ended up getting caught in a Native American raid. And this was by the Mohican tribe. And so it is very ironic and sad that one of the people who argued in favor of treating Native Americans with respect, because she, echoed Roger Williams' sentiments there, ends up getting killed in the midst of these sporadic, episodes of violence that were occurring between natives and settlers. So in spite of the tragic loss of the colonies, the founder of the colony, they do obtain a charter from the King of England for Rhode Island, and so because of their royal charter, they are considered an actual official colony. All right, and that leads us to the founding of the colony of Connecticut. Thomas Hooker is another preacher who disagreed with the Puritans. And basically, we're not going to get into the fine points of, theological difference between him and the Puritans, because they really aren't that significant. especially when we're talking historically speaking. But he and about 1,000 people move out of Puritan, Massachusetts, and head to the Connecticut River Valley and establish this village called Hartford. And then there were some other villages that were established as well. And then they were Windsor and Wethersfield, and the three villages joined together to form a colony called Connecticut. And one of the significant things about this colony, since you have different villages all joining together to kind of create this colony, is that they have to somehow have some form of like basis for agreeing on things. And so they create a document called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. And this is actually, and it's kind of like along the lines of what we were talking about with the Mayflower Compact. It is the first constitution in America. And it basically states that the government of Connecticut derives its rights from the consent of the governed, which is an idea from a political philosopher we're going to be getting to. Does anybody know who is it that makes that observation in?
Is it Hobbes?
It's a little bit further. Hobbes alludes to it. Hobbes kind of talks about it, but who really makes it kind of a popular thing? And of course, it's somebody who's going to be famous a little later on. It's John Locke. Okay, and we'll be getting to John Locke in a little bit, but there is another pastor who had also exited the colony of Massachusetts, named John Davenport, and he had a little colony called New Haven down here. And so New Haven ends up joining Connecticut in 1665, and so thus, and they then get a charter from the king, and thus another little colony is born. And this is why, of course, all of these states up in the Northeast are so small, is because they kind of started out this way. And that again,
Dr. Johnson?
Yes.
I have a question. So why was the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut considered the first constitution rather than the Mayflower Compact?
Mayflower Compact, because the Mayflower Compact kind of sets up how this village is going to be operated, but the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut is much larger than that. The Fundamental Orders of Connecticut is setting up a governing structure. Again, when we have these three villages kind of coming together, they have to have some, basis for agreeing on things for an entire colony that is going to be then seeking a charter from the, so it's seen as like a founding document for something bigger than a village is kind of why. That's the short answer, but that's an excellent question, Braden. So thank you. And that takes us to the colony of New Hampshire, which again is another example of a pastor who is basically not in agreement with Massachusetts, who leaves and basically ends up creating his own colony. So the Council for New England in 1623, which had taken over the old Plymouth Company's charter, granted charters to Captain John Mason and Sir Ferdinando Gorges for the remaining areas under their control. And you may remember that they controlled areas up in what is, kind of north of Massachusetts and what is Maine, the area of Maine. And a preacher named John Wheelwright, who had disagreed with the authorities in Massachusetts, who had been a friend of Anne Hutchinson. Again, you can't understate the importance of her influence, because she is the first rebel and does encourage other people to rebel as well. She basically kind of, plants the seeds of the ideas which will eventually lead to these other rebellions. He and his congregation are banished and go up to found the city of Exeter. So the people who have the royal charter are over in England for this area, but there's actually people living there who are from Massachusetts. Now, Captain Mason sent some fishermen and fur trappers to settle in the area, and they combined with Exeter. And then Massachusetts, feeling the the possibility that these other colonies are going to kind of outsize them in land, they buy the other guy's interest, which is Sir Ferdinand of Gorges. And so they buy Maine. So for a long time, actually, Massachusetts owns Maine. And so we'll be looking at that later when we get into the colonies. But Mason's area, that becomes a kind of a separate colony, which will be known as New Hampshire, which is named after the place that Mason is from in England, Hampshire. And in 1679, King Charles II of England, and this is going to be after the Restoration, which we're going to get to and all of that, he turns New Hampshire into a separate colony with a separate charter. So that is where we get the colony of New Hampshire. Again, trying to make a long, complicated story somewhat short and having it make sense. Speaking of long, complicated stories, we will also see and this is again part of what will end up leading to the English Civil War. We're going to see some monarchs in the Stuart dynasty, which is the dynasty that emerges after the end of the Tudor dynasty, who are pro-Catholic and who are thinking about leading England back into the Catholic fold. And this is going to cause a huge rift between them and this body in England known as Parliament. And so kind of a pro-Catholic king is going to reward some of his followers with some land in the New World. So the pro-Catholic king, Charles I, who eventually is going to end up losing his head in the English Civil War, which we'll be discussing, he basically he gives a charter to George Calvert, who is one of his close advisors, in 1632 for a new colony, because he basically is concerned, the king is concerned, that the Dutch in New Amsterdam, because remember, we haven't gotten to the 1660s yet where New Amsterdam will become New York. The Dutch are a growing power up here. He's worried that the Dutch may possibly encroach upon the very profitable colony of Virginia and cause the king to lose, that profitable area. So he wants to create a colony that is a buffer colony. So George Calvert gets a grant to create this buffer state. And who would be the likely people who would want to go there, since Catholics are going to become more and more persecuted as we get further into the whole English Civil War thing? Anybody? Who would want to move to Maryland?
Catholics.
Catholics, yes, very good. And so Catholics basically are going to move there. And of course, then it gets its name from the king's consort, Henrietta Maria. And again, we're going to jump ahead in history a little bit and kind of give you some of the further history of Maryland, so we don't have to make it too complicated when we go, further down the line. But there is a Protestant uprising called the Plundering Time. And it is put down. So a number of Protestants move into the area too, but the colony is controlled by the Calverts, they have been made into nobility. They have been made Lord Baltimore. So George Calvert is the first Baron Baltimore, and then Cecil Calvert, his son, is the second Lord Baltimore. So Catholics control it, but more and more Protestants move into the area and become kind of the majority population. So in order to bring peace between the two sides, there is a law that is passed called the Act of Toleration, which is kind of in response to this Protestant uprising. And it was passed in 1649, and it grants religious freedom to all Christians, but not to anybody who is not Christian, like, for instance, Jewish people. So more English Protestants continue to immigrate to Maryland, and there is a power struggle. And the Battle of the Severn is where the Protestants defeat the Catholic forces and move the capital from St. Mary's City to Annapolis in 1655, as kind of showing that the center of power has transitioned from the Catholics to the Protestants. So that's kind of why they change it to Annapolis, which remains the capital of Maryland today. And that takes us to the Pequot War. And I want to make sure I'm not getting anybody's slide. So has anyone heard of the Mystic River Massacre? No? All right. Well, since we are getting closer to the end here, I do see some people who are in the list but haven't said much, so I might start calling on you so you can get credit for today and not have to do any writing. So the Pequot tribe was this powerful tribe that felt like Massachusetts and Connecticut were continuing to encroach on their lands. And so their response is to just start massacring people in little villages, and little traders and settlers start getting killed in these isolated attacks. There was an attack on a Connecticut town that killed 9 settlers. And so there's kind of this grand council of New England colonies, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Connecticut Colony, everybody, all of the New England colonies see the Pequot tribe as a clear and present danger to their existence. Let me see here. I'm going to call on somebody. Valicia, what do you think the response of the New England tribes is going to be to these incursions by the Pequot? What are they going to do?
Of course, they're going to take it as people invading their land.
And so what would be the most logical thing that they would do in response to that?
Logical thing. Well, killing the people.
Yeah, essentially, let's go kill them all. So thank you, Valicia. And then, so they make an alliance with 2 enemies of the Pequot tribe, the Mohegan and the Narragansett. And kind of by dead of night, they creep into this formation where they're surrounding one of the major villages that kind of is like one of the centers of Pequot power on the Mystic River. And they then attack the village. The village even had like a little bit of a fort in it as well. And they set the village on fire, killing 700 men, women, and children in what has become known as the Mystic River Massacre. The Pequot chief Sassacus and the survivors were sold into slavery in Bermuda. And so this results in the virtual annihilation of the Pequot tribe. Now, anybody want to venture a response to this? People in their historical interpretations have basically taken the Mystic River Massacre as evidence of what, do you think? As people have kind of taken sides between the white population and the native population, if you're taking sides in that debate, what would you use this as evidence of?
That we were racist and just killed everybody so we could get land.
White devils.
White devils, yeah. Okay, so there is kind of a black legend of sorts that has developed in our country about the whites, and to a certain extent, it is very well deserved. But in some instances, it is a little on the exaggerated side, because the Pequot did commit some massacres of their own, which provoked this response. But of course, the response is overwhelming. And so that is the Pequot War of 1636 and the resulting Mystic River Massacre. And that does lead to something that hadn't been done before, because that threat had caused, the various colonies in this area, which we call New England, to unite together in coordinated action to respond to Native American threats. And so this actually causes the creation of what is known as the New England Confederation. And so the colonies of Massachusetts and Plymouth, which will later join Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Haven, which at the time were still separate, which would later join together, form an organization. And of course, why do we care? Like, and let me ask this of somebody who hasn't said anything yet. Cody, why do we care that these colonies are joining together? We're looking at historical trends. What is this a sign of? You know, this is the first time.
Possible rebellion.
Okay. When we rebel against Britain, do we have to join together in order to do that? Cody?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these guys all joining together in a confederation makes it so that they are basically going to, you know, have the strength to stand up to these natives. So to have the strength to stand up to Britain, we, you know, have to unite. All these colonies have to unite, even though they have their varying interests, and some of them are very competitive with each other. Yeah, and of course, they created a little constitution known as the Articles of Confederation of the United Colonies of New England, which again, that may sound familiar because we are going to hear something later called the Articles of Confederation that we'll be talking about. It does have a weak central authority called the Commission, which had 8 elected members, and they basically would contribute soldiers and funds in proportion to their populations. The one colony that refused to join was Rhode Island, because they wanted to be on friendly terms with Native Americans. They didn't want to fight them. And so they were known as Rogue Island because they were, you know, and of course that continues later. Rhode Island tends to be the rebel and not do what everybody else does. But that is the Confederation of New England. And that takes us to a very important event in Europe, which is going to have massive repercussions. I've referred to it a number of times, known as the English Civil War. So this is kind of a long and complex topic, which we're going to boil down into kind of like the basic stuff you need to know, because again, the deeper you dive into this, the more complicated it gets. But essentially, there are going to be 2 factions that are going to develop in England over the growing fear that King Charles I, a Stuart king who, you know, is he's got some Scottish blood, and again, that's all part of how the Stuart dynasty first appears. But he's got a temper, okay, and he does not like being told what to do. He's like, I am a king, and you know, there's this thing in Europe known as the divine right of kings. And just from the description, let me try to get somebody who hasn't said anything so they can get some credit. Jacob Mann, what do you think King Charles is saying when he's like, I'm a king and I have the divine right of kings? What is
He's
that?
saying that he's above the Parliament and that Parliament listens to what he wants to do.
Right, and the king derives his authority from whom?
God, because he has divine right.
Right. So the Catholic Church, way back in the you know, the Dark Ages, preceding the, you know, the medieval period, had said, you know, when they endorsed Charlemagne, they said, well, are you unhappy that you were born a peasant? Well, too bad. You didn't make that. Like, God chose for you to be a peasant. So if he wanted you to be a king, he would have put you into a royal family. If he wanted you to be a noble, so accept your position in life. Accept it, you know. So that was part of the Catholic Church trying to force people to just accept, you know, this unequal structure where certain people had privileges and other people were basically almost slaves. So Charles is, you know, England has, or everybody has kind of gone through a long transition, and there's a lot more ideas floating around, especially ideas from the Bible about people being equal and whatnot, that kind of contradict that whole old Catholic assertion. But King Charles is calling upon it because he does not like being told what to do, and he and his family do have this strong kind of propensity towards favoring the Catholics, even though he is technically the head of the Anglican Church. And so he starts putting Catholics in as his advisors and favoring Catholics. And Parliament, which is made up of a bunch of nobles, and they had does anybody know where this group known as Parliament, which was just a group of nobles, where did they get like their first recognition as kind of a power separate from the king? It's one of the first founding documents, and it's often referred to.
Isn't it the Magna Carta?
Yes. When King John was forced to sign it way back in the Middle Ages. So Parliament had kind of grown in power since then, and this group of nobles like basically become kind of this opposite power locus. And one of the powers they had was the power of the purse. And so if the king wanted to lay a new tax on people, which is what people hated, he had to ask permission of the nobles first. So he had to go to Parliament and ask them, and then Parliament would pass an act, which we consider those laws, to basically say, yes, we're going to put this new tax on because it's in the interest of all of England for us to go and fight this war, etc. Parliament succumbs to the king and says, we have some grievances, we have some problems with your rule, and they present him with this list of grievances. So he just dismisses Parliament, which was one of his powers as king. He just could dismiss Parliament. They were out of session. So that becomes known as the Short Parliament. But because of a war with Scotland, Charles, again, it's an incredibly complicated story. We're not going to get into it, but Charles is forced to call the quote unquote Long Parliament, which is known as that because it stays in session for a while, which meets on and off for about 20 years. And because he needs more money to fight this war. But they were like, hey, remember those grievances? And, if you want money, we want these grievances addressed. And he's like, no, I'm a king. I don't bow to you. I don't do what you say. And so, of course, the rift is getting wider and wider. And basically, there are some, Charles gets the upper hand in Scotland. He has some victories. And so then he's like, okay, these people in Parliament, they need to be taught a lesson. And so he tries to arrest 5 of the leaders of the opposition to him who are in Parliament. And when he does, he provokes this reaction. So that maneuver actually backfires on him. And Parliament starts calling together its own army. Okay. So when it comes down to brass tacks, basically it's all about who has the soldiers and who can force who to do what. And that's really what it comes down here. Parliament decides at this point, for their own preservation, for their own self-defense, that they must have their own army. And so Charles basically is kind of outnumbered by the supporters of Parliament. So there are 2 groups, and I have pictures here, kind of some artists' renderings of the various groups. One of them has slightly shorter hair. Back then, this hairstyle, this long hairstyle, was the vogue for all the guys. So if it was really long and flowing, they were the supporters of the king. It was easy to kind of tell who was who. And they were known as the Cavaliers. And then if it was shorter, it was, again, still long by our standards, but shorter than the Cavalier style. They were known as the Roundheads because, their head looks rounder because their hair is shorter. And religiously, there is a big, kind of divergence here between these 2 groups. So let me see here. Somebody who hasn't said anything yet. Scott, you've made a couple of real short comments, but let me just ask you real quick. Where do you think religiously people kind of come down in this debate here? What about the Puritans or the people who kind of lean Puritan? Because we've been talking about the Puritans. There's 3 groups. There's the Puritans who are like, hey, let's follow the letter of the Bible. Let's purify the church. There's the Anglicans who are the, like the official Church of England that have all these traditions very similar to the Catholics in a lot of ways. And then you have the more extreme, version, which is the Catholics, like people who are actually Catholic and want to go back to the days when the English people were part of the Catholic Church. Where do you think all of these three kind of shake out? Where do most Puritans end up in this divide? Where do most Anglicans end up in this divide, and where do the Catholics end up in this divide?
I feel like most people would be backing the Parliament.
Okay,
Because the Charles I wanted a bunch of power, and I feel like most people wouldn't like that.
Yeah, we've got two extreme groups. Like we've got the Puritans are an extreme group, the Catholics are an extreme group, the Anglicans are kind of the group in the middle, and there's probably more Anglicans than anybody else. They're the more moderate group. So you're feeling like there's a large portion. What extreme group is probably going to side with Parliament more?
The Puritans.
The Puritans, okay. What extreme group is probably going to shake out more on the side of the king?
Catholics.
The Catholics, okay. So then the Anglicans are kind of split between the two. What is going to cause Anglicans to want to join the Parliament side, the Roundhead side, rather than the Cavalier side, the king side, do you think?
The king wouldn't do anything about his grievances or whatever, and then he tried arresting 5 people, so he's kind of radical.
Right. The king is getting super aggressive with his army. He's arresting people who haven't committed any crimes. And that causes all of these, especially we're still talking at a time when nobles really are the ones who have most of the power. This caused a lot of nobles to like fear for their own safety. And so they join the Parliament side. The Parliament side becomes very powerful. And so this basically goes into a full-blown civil war, and Charles actually has to, and this is funny, when the further you get into European history, the further you see how people switch sides in conflicts all the time. Charles was fighting a war with the Scots, but he also had Scottish blood. Like the original Scottish king is actually the original Stuart king is actually a Scottish king who then takes the English crown, James I. And that's a whole different story about the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart dynasty. But he now is like joining forces with the Scots. He's like, hey, remember our common blood ties? I need your guys' help. I know we've been fighting the war, but hey, And so he's created a monster, essentially. And Parliament now has this big army. And the difference between the Parliament army, which they called the New Model Army, and the King's Army had to do with how people got promoted and how people took command. So let me ask somebody who hasn't said anything yet. Alec, can you hear me? Can you?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Alec, what do you think is the way in which in the traditional Cavalier King army that you get to actually have command over troops? Like, what do you have to be? What do you have to, like, what qualifies you?
Okay. Can you say it again?
Like, what would be like in a traditional European army like the King's Army? What would be the qualification to actually be in charge, to be an officer, to be in charge of troops? Remember the stratification of society.
What, you have to be like rich?
You have to be a noble. Yeah. You have to be born into a noble family. Are there talented military minds that probably go untapped because they are not in a noble family in the English military?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm just asking, do you think that that's probably the case?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are these brilliant people who just never get a chance to be who they are because they're kind of, they're never going to get to command men. But in the Parliament army, they get rid of that distinction because they're worried about, like, and plus they're a little more diplomat, like they're more like, hey, anybody can rise. And so this guy by the name of Oliver Cromwell, who is just like far and away probably one of the greatest military minds of his age, rises to the top in the New Model Army, which is Parliament's army, and he just smashes the Royal Army in several major battles. The Battle of Marston Moor in 1644, the Battle of Naseby. And after the Battle of Naseby, Charles actually surrenders himself to his, erstwhile enemy, the Scots, as a way of keeping himself from falling into the hands of Parliament. But it's kind of funny. The Scots are kind of mad at him for his previous incursions, against them. So they're like, yeah, we'll possibly negotiate, giving you Charles. So Charles flees from his imprisonment to rally his forces, and of course the Scots fear that the Parliament army is going to take them over, so they kind of invade England, and the great Roundhead general Oliver Cromwell defeats the Scots, captures Charles, and purges Parliament of its more moderate members, creating a group in Parliament that was all kind of extreme people who didn't like the king, known as the Rump Parliament. And in kind of a shocking development in Europe, because this does not happen very often, the people in Parliament vote to execute the king. And so the king and his archbishop are both executed in kind of this big statement, that Parliament is powerful and that the king can't tell them what to do, and that there is no going back to the Catholic Church. And his son, Charles II, is spirited out of the country. He actually hides in an oak tree. There are various people who are still loyal to the king who help him escape. There's a lot of cool little stories that go along with that as well. But Oliver Cromwell becomes not the king of this new Parliament-controlled England, but he becomes what is known as the Lord Protector. And he's a very religious man. But he's also an iron-fisted ruler when it comes to rebellions, and the Irish try, because they see this civil war as a moment of weakness where they can get their freedom. They try to rebel, and he goes on a expedition to Ireland where he massacres 2,000 rebels, and he then puts down a Scottish revolt. And basically he is going to be the person who, needing to finance all these wars, is going to start to enforce these policies known as mercantilism by enacting the Navigation Acts, which I believe I have a separate slide on. So it looks like we have hit 4 o'clock. Let me just ask another question of somebody who hasn't had a chance to say anything yet. Trinity, how do you think this is going to change the relationship between the colonies and England now that Parliament is running the show, so to speak, in England, and they're now in power?
I think it might strengthen the relationship because they kind of agree with like the Puritans, and instead of having like Catholic in power, they have someone kind of that they're familiar with.
There's a lot less persecution of the persecuted for a little while. So those big migrations that we saw in the 1630s, those aren't going to be as prominent. But they do need money. What old way of getting money that was kind of prominent during the time of the Spanish, which did lead to a conflict where the Spanish Armada tried to take England and failed. That was back during the reign of Elizabeth. I think I referred to it. But what way of getting money will be reinstituted, do you think, by Parliament in an attempt to kind of finance all of these wars that they're fighting? What way did they?
Um,
What way did they have of getting money from the Spanish, so to speak, is what I'm asking.
like with like the silver and gold thing, like the
What
where they
what
kind of
what do we call those people who take silver and gold away from the Spanish
uh
in the Caribbean who've gotten movies made?
pirates.
Pirates, right. So piracy becomes a big deal again. As a matter of fact, his forces will actually capture the former Jamaican, I'm sorry, the former Spanish colony of Jamaica and make it into a British colony. And that will serve as a base for English privateers in the Caribbean to take Spanish treasure ships. And they actually will later capture an entire treasure fleet, uh, um, seizing another fortune in silver, which will help finance his many conflicts that he gets into as this Lord Protector of England, which he will serve as for about a decade until his death. So quite an interesting character, Oliver Cromwell, in a lot of ways. And so let me see here. I just want to see if there's anybody else who hasn't said a word. Autumn, you've said a couple of things. How is this going to affect the colonies in terms of their relationship with other powers now that piracy is back on the menu, so to speak? Now that piracy is something that everybody's doing, how does this affect the interaction that they have? Anyone? Or I'm sorry, Autumn?
Yeah, they might be more hostile towards each other and there might be more tension.
Yes. So especially with those Spanish down in Florida and the English up in, further up the coast, this is going to breed more conflict. And of course, does anybody remember what mercantilism is? We discussed it when we discussed the triangular trade. It's really kind of more of an AP Euro topic, but it's something you have to understand what's going to happen next. Nathan, do you remember what is mercantilism?
Isn't it where raw goods from the colonies go back to the colonizer, and that's where they produce the goods?
Right. So they'll eventually, as we get further into the Industrial Revolution, they'll eventually start having factories where those raw goods are processed. That'll provide jobs in the home country. But really, there's two ways to use your colonies. One of them, which you mentioned, which is they have to provide you with the raw materials you want, and tobacco being one of the big ones that was being provided at this time from the colony of Virginia. But what is the other way in which you can use your colonies to help the home country? Not only can you make them produce things and send you those things, once you have turned those into products, you can what? You can make them
send them back.
Yeah, you can make them buy your products. You can say, you can't buy from the cheapest person. You can't buy from the Dutch. You can't buy from the Spanish. You can't buy from the French. You have to buy from us only. But they're like, well, the Dutch produce far cheaper tea than you do. And they'd be like, too bad. Law says you must only purchase English tea. So that, of course, is going to lead us into the Navigation Acts. But since we are out of time for today, we'll stop. So everybody, thank you for your participation. And for those of you who are viewing this via YouTube, please refer to the questions that I sent out with the link and turn that into me to get your points. And that will be due on Tuesday when we return. But for those of you who are here and said everything, or said two significant things, you've got all the credit, but everybody's got some credit as well. So thank you everybody for being a part, and we are going to end our session for today.
Do we have a meeting tomorrow?
No, I was just going to do one for today, but that was just the one. This is kind of our substitute for textbook homework over the weekend, is just this. So we're done, and that's it. The rest of the weekend we're not going to meet. So now if we get really close to the end and we have to kind of do a little more to make sure we get everything done before we, take a test or something, we may expand it a little bit. But for right now, I think we're good. So see you all later.
So do we have to do any essay questions?
Nope. If you have said 2 things, you are good. If you've made 2 significant comments, if you made 1 significant comment, you have 80%. If you've made 2 significant comments, you have 100% of the points. So if you, like, say for instance, you see, oh, I got an 80% because I only made 1 significant comment, then you could do one of the 2 essay questions to make up for the other points that you missed, and that I would accept that. So you can get the full homework points if you want. Okay.
Dr. Thompson?
Yes.
Do I get my points for doing my slide?
Your presentation did count as your significant. You answered some questions that I asked too, so you definitely got your points, Lauren.
Oh, sick. Thank you.
All right, no problem. All right, everybody. I will see you all in class next week.